Hey there, you awesome people! I hope your day has been nothing short of fantastic. Welcome back to a brand new episode of What If Deku ate the Gomu Gomu no Mi. Izuku used to be quirkless, but that all changed when he sunk his teeth into an unusual fruit, granting him the power to stretch his body like rubber. With this newfound ability, he's on a quest to become the ultimate hero. Don't forget to shower some appreciation onto the incredible author responsible for this fanfiction. The link is conveniently waiting for you in the description box down below. If you're totally vibing with this what-if scenario, drop me a comment and let your thoughts be known. And while you're at it, don't miss out on other mind-blowing what-ifs on this channel. Alright, without further ado, let's dive straight into this video. Jaku Hospital. Heroes were starting to flood into the underground laboratory, overwhelming the Nomus with numbers. Endeavor personally took off the head of woman with a flame-infused left uppercut, while Rappa pulverized Rigby's face in with punches, and when his shoulders couldn't take the strain, ended up switching to his legs to continue stomping the Noma's head. Xless. Secure Shigaraki. I'm going to get Garaki back to the front to get him to stop the Nomus, shouted Present Mike as he pulled Garaki up before dragging him away. Those rampaging Nomus listen to you, right? Xless nodded, putting his hand on Shigaraki, making sure he wasn't awake. Looking around, he saw a machine that was clearly still working from the humming noise it was making. The tubes must have protected it from the damages, thought Xless, better to destroy it to be safe. While Xless knew his priority should have been to secure Shigaraki, he couldn't risk any sort of data that could replicate Garaki's work to spread. Since Shigaraki was currently out of commission, Xless couldn't help but decide to destroy the machine, distracting him from the primary objective. It was this momentary distraction that cost him and the whole raid everything from a perfect capture. Xless failed to notice the growing puddle that Shigaraki had been bathing inside, as well as the exposed wiring from tubes connecting to the various systems, crackling with electricity. If Xless had taken the time to take Shigaraki out of the solution and into a dry area, or remembered Miruko's warning about the activation of Nomus involving some sort of electrical shock through the solution, then perhaps this situation could have been avoided. Shigaraki was awakened as the exposed wiring touched the solution, which acted as a medium and catalyst to awaken Shigaraki. Xless looked at Shigaraki in shock at his sudden awakening. Before he could even react, Shigaraki activated his quirk, which had been amplified significantly by Garaki's experiment. Not only that, but he now had access to the original All-for-One quirk that All-for-One had left for him. Xless knew he had fucked up, and realized that he had no chance to disable Shigaraki, so he decided to follow through with his previous. With less than a second, Xless used his quirk and sent his strongest blast not at Shigaraki, but at the machine. It wasn't enough to destroy it, but it made a hole and potentially damage anything within it before he died. Present Mike had just gotten Garaki out of the long hallway after hearing him rant, and was severely tempted to use his quirk to blow Garaki's brain out. Just then, they both heard something crumble and couldn't help but turn around to see where the source was coming from. Their eyes widened, one in shock and the other in joy as the hallway disintegrated before their very eyes, and was continuing to spread. Before the wave of decay touched them, Gran Torino managed to rush and grab the two, quickly jetting away with all his might. "Everyone get out now!" warned Gran Torino as he observed the decay spreading without Shigaraki needing to touch the said object. "Don't let the cracks touch you, otherwise you'll die." It was apparent that Shigaraki was using the ground as a medium for his quirk as it continued to spread out towards the heroes and Nomus. Quickly heeding Gran Torino's warning, everyone turned around to run away, knowing they had no way to stop it. Ryukyu immediately grabbed anyone she could in her transformed dragon form while flying out of the way. "Get on!" shouted Ryukyu towards Eraserhead, who immediately threw his capture scarf towards her, wrapping around a claw. Before he could be safely pulled up, one of the Nomus, LF, grabbed onto his leg. Before LF could drag Eraserhead onto the ground into his death, a shield throw from Crust cut off LF's arm, letting Eraserhead go free. At the same time, a blunted shield toss hit Rappa, sending him flying towards the entrance, right onto Ryukyu. However, by doing so, Crust left himself open as decay crept up his legs. Rappa had never been one to call any of his superiors with respect. Even with Overhaul, he never called him by any respectful title, always calling him Overjerk, or any other names. However, his time spent with Crust, even if it had been short, had nothing but utmost respect for the hero. When he had been offered a job at his agency, Rappa had been very tempted to accept it. And now, Crust had saved him from decaying into pieces at the cost of his own life, when he didn't even have to. Rappa was damn sure that he could have made a floor of shields underneath his feet to escape the decaying wave. Instead, he had saved his life instead, which instantly caused the respect for Crust to rise up high above any others. Oyaban/Crust, shouted Rappa and Eraserhead. Crust merely smiled as he raised his hands to give them a thumbs up before he disintegrated into dust. Mirio phased into the ground before shooting himself towards the exit, grabbing Kana and Barrows as he passed by them. To increase his speed, he let a foot phase into the ground before unphasing it, shooting him forward far faster than trying to run on foot. Kana gritted her teeth as she raised her rifle once more before shooting a bullet, curving it into the hallway in hopes that she could hit the source of this wave. Her shot decayed before it could hit Shigaraki, though. Endeavor grabbed Miruko and his sidekick Kido before jetting away, using his flames on his legs and back to propel himself forward. Sadly, a few heroes that weren't as mobile were unable to escape and died as the wave caught up to them. You heroes had a chance of victory, only for a miracle to happen, cackled Garaki. You let it slip when you didn't stop his awakening. Now that he has awakened, everything that you have worked for will now crumble before your eyes. Victory is ours. The decay wave kept spreading past the hospitals and onto the streets, into the city. Luckily, most if not all the civilians had been escorted out the city, but the evacuation radius was larger than they could have predicted. The heroes responsible for the escape found themselves trying to grab whoever or whatever they could. Sadly, a few were unable to escape and disintegrated into dust. Shigaraki took Xless's cape, as he had been cold, and so his first instinct was to take his cloak while killing everyone within range. Shigaraki stood on the plateau he had created, watching the destruction he had created with glee. As the wind blew across his body, sending the cape fluttering in the wind, Shigaraki turned to the machine Xless had blasted. Opening it up, he frowned as he saw almost all the samples Garaki had been replicating was destroyed. Shigaraki felt his head throb for a second, with an urge to destroy before regaining control. One of the first things Shigaraki discovered with his new enhancements was now he could choose when he wanted to decay something without worrying about touching with all 5 fingers. It seems not everything is going as planned, said Shigaraki as he picked up the phone Garaki had dropped. However, the plan still remains the same, does it not? Gigantomachia, come to me. And bring the others. Few minutes before, Gunga Mountain Villa, Fumikage had rushed over to where he had last spied his mentor, Hawks, landed. Granted, he had forcefully pushed himself out of Fat Gum's body, who had been transporting him and the other students who had been in the front line to assist. He had been responsible for sealing up the main entrance, using his ultimate move Ragnarok. Dark Shadow not only collapsed the entrance, but also pushed back Redestro, who had released his quirk up to 100% stress output. Being honest, he had won only because Redestro's mechanical leg failed to support the amount of force being put on. But still, he had been worried when he saw those flames on the top floor, followed by Hawks falling with another body. Damn, nobody's escaped my fat when they've already been entrapped until now, muttered Fat Gum, both impressed and annoyed. Quickly dropping Denki, Juzo, and Kinoko, Fat Gum rushed back to the front lines. Upon arriving though, Fat Gum had to dodge a flying empty lady from landing on him with her large ass as eyes sprouted from the villa. Geeton, who had been lucky to not be trapped inside the underground assembly hall when the raid started, swiftly began taking command of the situation. Under his command, the PLF began to organize a better counterattack, especially since Geeton gave them all breathing space with his attack. Don't get caught up in random skirmishes, focus on one point and break through, ordered Geeton. The PLF managed to push back the heroes, if only for a moment. Geeton had his hands full dealing with a pissed-off empty lady while trying to support his fellow PLF members. However, everything changed when a giant hand suddenly came out from the ground beneath them. Meanwhile, Fumikage had found Hawks, and was wary when he saw Twice and Himiko around him. However, Hawks managed to convince Fumikage not to attack, but rather take the two to a safer location, away from the fighting, before taking him back to the rear guard. They won't interfere. Believe in me, said Hawks. Fumikage gave the two villains a wary glance before taking up into the air to fly him back to find a medic. Himiko and Twice, or rather just Jean Babaigawara as he no longer had his quirk, glanced at each other, unknowing what to do. Are you alright, Jean? Asked Himiko after Jean told Himiko he had been hit by a quirk erasing bullet. Yeah, I'm good, nodded Jean. The voices in my head, they're not disappearing, but it's getting more faint. I'm not fine, so what should we do? Asked Himiko. I mean, we're technically a part of the PLF. I'm not sure, admitted Jean, Hawks was adamant in trying to help me. I still have his number on my phone, too. I would say go back to help. But Dabi tried to fry me after finding out I lost my quirk. I don't think I'd be any use except for cannon fodder. That jerk. Huffed Himiko. He almost roasted both of us without even caring. Toga-chan, said Jean, I'm going to stay. I can't do anything useful right now, but I don't want to side with the heroes. It's better if I just hide until the end of this raid. But there is something you can still do. Jean brought out a small vial from his pocket and pressed it onto Himiko's hand. Himiko glanced down before realizing just what it was. My blood before I was hit by that bullet, said Jean. You showed us you can not only copy someone's appearance, but also their quirk. You can take my place in this. However, do what you want to do, not what people expect you to do. Out of everyone, you were the sweetest to me. I certainly can't deny that I felt like I belonged somewhere with you guys. But this is love we're talking about. Do what you want to do. That's why we got together, right? To do whatever we want? Jean, breathe out Himiko. I can explain. I don't, interrupted Jean. Whether it's just a crush or real, the decision is up to you to do what you want. I'll support you all the way. I don't want to do anything. Himiko chuckled a little, but was glad to see Jin's mental instability seem to be fading slightly. He knows it's me no matter what disguise I don. I've never been able to trick him, admitted Himiko. Jean whistled. That's impressive. Everyone, even Shigaraki, couldn't tell when you transformed into somebody else. That might be something to look into. Jean sat down before waving Himiko off. Go. You have your choice to make. I think there's a transport nearby where you can hijack. Himiko nodded as she rushed away. Back at the main headquarters, Night Eye grit his teeth as the plan was falling apart before their eyes. They were so close to arresting Shigaraki and Garaki, and the Gunga Mountain village raid was going well when everything came crashing down. The hospital and the surrounding area suddenly crumpled to dust, and from the reports that were being sent, Shigaraki had awakened. The other raid had hit a stalemate for a little bit before a giant hand had suddenly come out from underneath. That has to be Gigantomachia that was reported, growled Night Eye. He must have been alerted somehow to act up now. Night Eye was immediately trying to come up with various plans to deal with the current scenarios, but nothing solid was coming up in mind. I'm going, said Tashinori as he immediately began to walk out. You can't, shouted Night Eye. There's nothing you can do. If I stand here and do nothing, then I might as well be useless, said Tashinori. I may be retired, but I know there is something I can still do. Trust me on this. I'm not just throwing my life away. I've got a special plan set up for this. Night Eye raised his hand in an attempt to grab Tashinori, but the man stoutly left the building, swiftly getting into a vehicle. Which one to go to? Whispered Tashinori, trying to figure out who needed help the most. Suddenly, his car began to pick up radio chatter. Curious about who was on his private channel, Tashinori grabbed the radio. Who is this? How did you get to this secure channel? Ordered Tashinori. A few seconds later, a reply was heard, causing his eyes to widen. With that, his decision was made as he revved up the engine, driving towards his destined location at untold speed. A second later, the car began to fly up into the sky. As Tashinori drove, his hand touched a package within the glove box. Can't this go any faster? Asked a male voice on top of a fighter jet. Patience, young one, said the female voice beside him. We're almost there. It wasn't easy getting approval from the bureaucracy to fly out to help out when it's not America's problem yet. What permission? Asked the pilot. You told the president that we're heading off to Japan for vacation and that you were taking all of us as part of an extended training mission, and then left. The rest of the pilots flying the X-66 jets chuckled in unison at this. Traitors. Mutiny. Gasped the female in mock horror. Izuku and Kathleen were on their way to Japan to assist in the raid. Nagant and Barrows had been recalled a week earlier to assist. Izuku wanted to join, but the risk of Izuku being exposed before the raid was too much. Nisa had given Izuku a timeline when he could start his flight back, but it had been delayed due to various reasons, one being the government did not want Kathleen to interfere with foreign matters. After extensive arguments, Kathleen decided to throw the playbook out on politics, stated she was going while figuratively giving the middle finger to the ones who wanted her to stay, and flew out. You're so going to get in trouble for this, so don't drag us down, laughed another pilot. I'll treat you all to sushi and beer after we're done with this, laughed Kathleen, causing her men to cheer. Hold on everyone. We're almost there, thought Izuku. At the same time, he was already plotting how to get there even faster. Jaka City. Endeavor hurled himself towards Shigaraki after making sure Kido took Miruko to a safe spot. As the current #1 hero, he couldn't afford to show cowardice, otherwise it would affect the morale of everybody else. Hell's Curtain. Endeavor blanketed the entire area in flames, not even hesitating on putting it on full blast. Normally against regular villains, it would overkill and risk a very high chance of death. However, Endeavor knew that Shigaraki wasn't any regular villain anymore. His cautiousness was proven when, despite burning in the blanket of flames, Shigaraki lunged forward, trying to grab his face. Endeavor quickly leaned back, letting the hand fly over him. But Endeavor saw that despite his initial attack, Shigaraki was already healing, his burnt skin quickly fading away. Using his core strength as well as his flames to boost his momentum, Endeavor spun in the air, positioning his body behind Shigaraki before punching him down into the plateau, pouring on the flames once more. "Everyone, this is Endeavor. I have engaged Shigaraki at the hospital ruins," reported Endeavor. "Anyone who can move without touching the ground should encircle my position immediately." Suddenly, Shigaraki's hand came out of the stream of fire, trying to touch Endeavor. "I won't let you touch me," said Endeavor as he grabbed Shigaraki's wrist, only to see the palm of his hand glowing. Before he could react, Endeavor was blasted away, sending him tumbling across the field. Shigaraki was already getting used to all these new quirks stocked into his body, feeling giddy with the amount of power he now had. But something was missing within him. A voice echoed inside him, desiring one quirk above all else. "One for all," whispered Shigaraki as Endeavor shot himself forward once more towards him. "One for all?" echoed Endeavor in confusion. In the evacuation area, Burning had been directing the evacuation area while choosing which heroes to assist Endeavor. Of course, her mic picked up Endeavor's voice, to which she looked up in confusion. "One for all? What's that? Never mind, let's continue with the evacuation. We need to expand the perimeter," shouted Burning. Katsuki overheard her words and glanced over. There was only one quirk with that name, that the current holder was overseas for the time being. Katsuki felt his fingers twitch, trying to decide what to do. Shigaraki frowned as he couldn't tell where the quirk was located. Originally, All for One wanted Ragdoll's quirk to remember where quirks were, but he had lost it during the confrontation against Izuku. While the original had been lost, an inferior duplicate had been made, but it did not have the range nor capabilities of remembering quirks. It paired up with a scanning quirk, but Shigaraki couldn't find what he was looking for. "What to do?" hummed Shigaraki to himself as he was attacked by Endeavor, barely looking at him as if he wasn't a threat. Then he found himself being attacked by Ryukyu. He put his hand up, intending to destroy the attacking limb, only to find his quirk erased by Eraserhead. Shigaraki had to admit it was pretty gutsy and cool to attack him like this. He took advantage of being in the air to issue a command on the phone he was still holding on to. "Kill every person you see," ordered Shigaraki as he floated in the air for a bit from being hit. Endeavor charged forward and up thanks to Kido, readying his body to incinerate Shigaraki into ashes. All while Eraserhead was making sure to keep his quirk active on Shigaraki, with manuals supplying eye drop solution into his eyes to prevent him from getting dry eyes. Endeavor unleashed everything he had, only for Shigaraki to suddenly dodge by punching the air, forcing him to shift to the side. "That power, even with his quirks erased, he's this strong?" questioned Endeavor. "It's not on par with All Might, sadly," bemoaned Garaki. Remodeling his body would have overburdened his brain. The fact that Shigaraki had such strength without any quirks was mind-boggling, but not something the heroes could ponder much about, especially with Shigaraki getting used to his new body and powers. He easily maneuvered himself in the air with brute strength before lining up Endeavor and Ryukyu. Just as he was about to punch though, his peripheral vision saw something coming towards him. Without hesitation, he swiped his other hand at it, causing a shockwave that diverted the bullet and arrow at him. "Fucking snipers," cussed Shigaraki in annoyance at the attempted shot and the missed opportunity to strike down two heroes in one blow as Endeavor and Ryukyu quickly separated paths. Shigaraki gave it some thought before making a plan. At first, he wanted to cause mayhem and destruction by charging towards the civilians, but dismissed that. Instead, he would just regroup with the others before bringing down Japan. But first, to give a devastating blow as well as to have some fun. As the heroes were charging towards Shigaraki, Nomas suddenly appeared from the side, charging towards them. They were the Nomas that had initially been disabled, only to suddenly reawaken thanks to Shigaraki's quirks. He had induced an electronic current in his orders via radio waves, awakening them all to obey his command. Not only that, but when he began his first attack with decay, he controlled it so they wouldn't decay the Nomas. Though the Nomas were not high ends like the ones Maruko had to fight, they were very close to such a stage, causing havoc against the reinforcements. With that, Shigaraki decided to aim for Eraser head first. Rushing towards him, he was met with heavy resistance, first from Gran Torino, who slammed into him fist first. Then Katsuki appeared from behind, blasting Shigaraki with everything he had. Shigaraki flipped and was about to land on the ground when Mirio came up from below, smashing a fist into his spine to send him up into the air, where he was tackled away by Endeavor. "We'll need to hold him back here," ordered Endeavor as the other heroes landed next to him. "With Eraserhead's support, we'll hold him here." With a roar, they all charged forward, Ryukyu quickly joining in the fray. Gunga Hill Villa. Empty Lady had encountered giant villains before, but this was the first time she met one that could overpower her so easily. Quirks that could transform a person into a giant like here were quite rare, and most needed trigger or some sort of enhancement to reach her height. Gigantomachia easily towered her by 16 feet, not to mention his strength and weight surpassed hers. Gigantomachia had not only freed himself as well as the others from the underground assembly hall by punching a hole through the roof, but grabbed the original members of the League of Villains before rushing off to where he had been summoned to. This excluded Jean, whom Dabi and Himiko managed to convince the others not to get him as he was now quirkless and in a safe location, away from the fighting. Skeptic had been dragged on by Dabi, but the other original leaders of the Meta Liberation Army had been left behind. Many members of the PLF began following Gigantomachia in hopes to support him, while quite a few heroes were engaged in combat against Giton and Redestro. "Get us closer!" shouted Midnight as Kamui Woods carried her behind his back. He would be aware of the awfully large and soft objects pressed on his back, but in the heat of battle, they were the farthest thing from his mind. Kamui Woods swung them on the treetops, catching up the Gigantomachia when he decided he had been delayed far enough. Grabbing Empty Lady's flailing leg, he tossed her aside. Kamui Woods' first reaction was to check on his teammate, but Midnight snapped him back on track, stating that they couldn't afford to let Gigantomachia reach Jaka's city. Gritting his teeth, Kamui launched himself higher to get closer to Gigantomachia from Midnight. Just as he was going to swing by the mouth, his eyes widened as he noticed Dabi and the others hiding on Gigantomachia's spiky back. Without hesitation, he tossed Midnight forward as Dabi attacked him, engulfing him in hot flames. Kamui Woods felt the fire sear through his wooden armor as he fell down to the ground. Midnight had been flung away from fire high up into the air as a last-ditch effort to get her closer to Gigantomachia, but Mr. Compress had caught sight of her and threw his marbles out in front of Midnight, releasing its trapped form to reveal concrete debris the size of her whole body that he had picked up. At the speed Midnight was going and how close it was, she could only accept her fate that it was going to hurt a lot. Not to mention she was still high up in the air. The end result was not going to bode well for her. "Excuse me," piped in a voice as a gloved hand touched the debris before Midnight collided into it. Suddenly, as Midnight collided into the debris, she did not face plant into solid matter. Instead, the debris caved in, as if made from elastic materials instead of solid, softening the collision. Midnight rebounded from the debris back into the air, bouncing on a few elastic pockets before safely landing on the ground. Midnight looked up in gratitude at not being smashed into the wall to see just who it had been that saved her. "La Brava," said Tobito as he quickly bounced in the air, placing himself in front of Gigantomachia. "Gentle," whispered Iba from the headset, "I love you." "Thank you, La Brava," said Tobito as her quirk was applied on him. His hair spiked up as he felt strength and love coursing through his body. "Now then, perhaps an introduction is in order. I was known as Gentle Criminal, but I have been given a chance to be reborn and to be someone that my beloved La Brava can look up to. For now, I am the Elastic Hero, Gentle Hero." Lane thought quite a few villains who heard his proclamation, but Tobito didn't care. La Brava could be heard squealing in excitement in his headset, and that was all he needed. Gently Super Lover. The air in front of Gigantomachia turned into a huge elastic barrier that Gigantomachia crashed into. Gigantomachia roared as he pushed forward, but found himself slowing down, unable to break through the elastic barrier with ease. Not only that, but Empty Lady managed to hurl herself onto Gigantomachia's leg to hinder him, along with Kamui Woods on top of her head, using his quirk to trap Gigantomachia's leg to Empty Lady's arm to tighten her grip. "I haven't been this clingy since I was in middle school," cried Empty Lady as she tried to squeeze Gigantomachia's leg as hard as she could in hopes of breaking something. Yet not everything was going well. Gigantomachia roared in rage at being hindered, his fingers turning into sharp claws in an attempt to stab Tobito. Tobito almost had a heart attack when one of those deadly claws got close to him. His empowered quirk couldn't hold Gigantomachia forever, especially since all he needed to do was to turn another direction. Annoying, hissed Dabi. Compress, throw me. Mr. Compress understood, activating his quirk on Dabi. With the help from Spinner, the two managed to fire the marble piece to their right before Mr. Compress released Dabi. Dabbit was now free-falling, but he used his quirk to blast himself past the elastic wall. Sorry, hero, but burn, mocked Dabi as he sent a stream at Tobito. Tobito widened his eyes, his instincts telling him to move, but he tried to stay put to keep the barrier up. Gentle, get out of there, shouted Kamui Woods, but it was too late. The fire burned Tobito, causing him to roar in pain. Luckily, Ibis' quirk was able to give him more durable skin, but it still burned him all the same. Tobito gritted his teeth as he focused on his barrier in front of him, unwilling to let go. Fine, you asked for this, said Dabi as he held up his hand once more. Flash, fire, fist, jet, burn. A concentrated flame was fired at Tobito, this one far stronger than his previous attack. Tobito had not choice but to finally let go of stacking elastic barriers against Gigantomachia to defend himself from Dabi, creating an elastic barrier in front of him. The heat overpowered his barrier, and the explosion sent him flying to the left, landing right behind a struggling Midnight. Midnight herself was under siege by several villains, all of them wearing masks. This made her quirk useless against them, but she wasn't a pushover without her quirk. That being said, she was being pushed back by their attacks, especially the bulky villain who wielded purple gas that was toxic to breath. When Tobito landed behind Midnight, the villains decided to aim for him, knowing it would distract Midnight. While Midnight knew they were playing her, she had no choice but to multitask to protect the downed Tobito. The gas villain managed to finally capitalize on a mistake and pinned her to the ground, using his weight and strength to his advantage. Not only that, but several other villains helped pin her down. You know, if you want to live, all you gotta do is be my woman, taunted the villain lustfully. You're a little older than I'd like, past the Christmas cake age, but you still got a rocking body. Midnight felt her blood vessels on her brows twitch in anger, but she was helpless. Still, it didn't mean she couldn't get some words out, especially since she could see how hard the man was breathing after just a few minutes of fighting. With your pathetic stamina, I doubt you'd even last a minute, spat Midnight. The villain growled in anger at this before raising his hand. Maybe I should beat that attitude out of you first. Midnight didn't even flinch, ready for whatever they had planned. She would never give in to their demands, nor would she beg. It was what she signed up for. The only hope was that the message she gave Momo would be enough. As Gigantomachia tore through the barrier, everything seemed hopeless to stop him. Let's keep going, shouted Dabi as he maneuvered himself back onto Gigantomachia's back with a malicious grin, eager to unveil his part. Suddenly, jets flew past all of them, causing quite a bit of people to pause at the sudden interruption of jet engines. Look, up there, shouted a villain. Something was dropped. You don't think it's a nuke, right? Gulped another. Nah, seems too small. Looks like a person, said another villain with eagle eyes. Pfft, what can one person do? Scoffed another villain. What's he or she look like? Green hair, freckles, and a straw hat, reported the villain with eagle eyes. He looks kinda young, like a freshman from high school. While those who heard began to laugh, a few other heroes looked worried. Who was the one who had just dived off a jet that clearly flew past Mach speed? Momo and the others, who had been stationed in the back and were ready to initiate the plan, looked up in unison to see who it was. When Momo, Melissa, and Itsuka caught sight of a familiar straw hat, their eyes could barely contain their tears at who had just returned. Gigantomachia saw someone falling in front of him, but ignored it. He would just swat the person out of the way to continue his path to his master. As everyone began to dismiss the falling person, Skeptic squinted at the said person before realizing just who it was. He was on the watch list for a reason. The only person that had been captured by All for One, who publicly tried to steal his quirk, only for it to completely backfire. A threat that Shigaraki wanted dead, Garaki wanted his body for experimentation, and the original MLA wanted to be terminated in case of a future threat. One that they couldn't find as he had suddenly disappeared after the winter break. The one who had just reappeared after falling from the sky. It's Izuku Midoriya. Get him before it's too late, barked Skeptic. Just as he made that statement though, Izuku activated Float, stopping in the air for a second. Izuku looked straight at Gigantomachia. His eyes opened before his pupils suddenly constricted. Then he unleashed Conqueror's Haki. Immediately, everyone felt something in the air change as a shockwave originating from Izuku's body began to spread across the battlegrounds. Everyone froze as the shockwave passed by them, including Gigantomachia. This feeling, I've only felt one other person who could have such a presence, and that's my master, thought Gigantomachia in shock. What is this? Such a powerful feeling that it impacts my soul and makes me want to kneel, thought Redestro in shock. This feeling. It's similar to after fighting our beloved leader, but yet he hasn't even done anything. Such overwhelming presence and power, thought Giton. As the shockwave seemed to dissipate, there was only silence in the air. Midnight, who had been struggling against the villain holding her, felt the grip on her wrists slacken and was ready to kick the man in the balls when the villain suddenly slumped to the side. Midnight looked in confusion before pulling the mask off to douse him in her sleeping gas when she saw there was no need. The villain's eyes had rolled up to his head while foaming in the mouth, and he wasn't alone. The majority of the PLF members were all knocked unconscious, all suffering the same symptoms. A few heroes were also knocked, but most of them managed to hold on to their wits, though quite a bit fell onto their knees, trying to support themselves. Izuku had risked bombarding the area with his haki, and was rewarded for it. With most of the villains now out of the picture, the heroes could overwhelm the ones resisting still. Midnight, after making sure Tobito was alright, looked up to see Izuku Midoriya floating in front of the frozen Gigantomachia, staring down at him. She could easily see it was because of him that she had been saved from probable death. Thinking about it for just a second, she made up her mind. If those girls haven't gotten all the way with him and don't mind a little help, I'll be first in line to show them how to rock his world, thought Midnight to herself. Izuku glared at Gigantomachia, ready to start punching when he saw a limb floating up towards him, carrying an earpiece communicator. Quickly taking the earpiece and putting it on, Izuku heard several voices whom he dearly missed. Izuku/Midoriya, shouted several of them at once until Momo cleared her throat. Izuku, we have a plan to incapacitate by forcing him to go to sleep, but we need a little more time. I know it's asking a lot, but can you delay him? Not a problem, replied Izuku. Any chance you can improvise getting him open for a clear shot? I got a new ultimate move that can probably also knock him out. Got it. Melissa, I need your help, shouted Momo as she turned away from Izuku. Gigantomachia finally recovered from his shock before roaring, raising his hand to swipe Izuku away. He had been delayed long enough. Izuku rushed forward, dodging the swipe before firing a punch with one for all at 100% infused. The punch slammed into the center of Gigantomachia, but the giant was barely phased. So one punch isn't enough, how about multiple punches? Roared Izuku as he dodged a few more swipes before flying forward, spinning in the air as he did so. Patricia Storm Smash. A barrage of punches slammed into Gigantomachia's gut as Izuku kept spinning and punching. This actually forced Gigantomachia to stagger a bit. He's getting really annoying, shouted Dabi as he raised his hand to burn Izuku, only for Kamui Woods to wrap the said arm and jerk him backwards. Don't you dare, villain, shouted Kamui Woods, seemingly regaining his second wind. Pfft, wood? Really, against me? Scoffed Dabi as he burnt the wood away. Gigantomachia was getting angry. At first, he thought the shortest route to his master was to ignore the gnats. And to a certain extent, he was correct. However, the sudden appearance of Izuku Midoriya threw that plan out the window. He knew this man was a threat to his master that he could not ignore. So instead, he would kill Izuku before going to his master. With a roar, Gigantomachia attacked Izuku, and thanks to one of his quirks, he could ignore any pain that Izuku dished out. Izuku had no choice but to stop his own attack to dodge, using both Danger Sense and Observation Haki to predict Gigantomachia's attack. Izuku, retreat a bit. We have the trap ready, said Momo through the earpiece. Izuku nodded as he floated back, with Gigantomachia following him to attack. Suddenly, the ground beneath him broke apart, causing him to trip and fall down. His chin slammed onto the ground, just where Minetta's balls were waiting on the ground, attached to the ground and ropes. Ibera immediately wrapped her vines around Gigantomachia's neck in an attempt to hold him down, but Gigantomachi's strength and size was too big for her as her vines easily snapped. However, he noticed something pulling at his jaw and looked down to see several ropes attached to Minetta's ball underneath his chin. Immediately, the muscles of the students available began to pull. Itsuka, Rikido, and Jiroto were straining to pull his jaw and head down. Meanwhile, the others began to engage against Dabi and the others to distract them. Denki tried to shock them with multiple pointers stuck onto them thanks to Reiko, but was stopped short when Mr. Compress threw more debris at him, knocking him away. The others began hurling the jars of concentrated anesthetics that Momo had created towards Gigantomachia's mouth. In theory, just one jar should be enough to knock him out, but more couldn't hurt, especially with his size and quirks. Unfortunately, Gigantomachia merely needed to forcefully blow air through his mouth to not only knock away all the jars, but send them all flying away. Dabi followed up with a burst of flames that blocked them from getting any closer. Kinoko had tried to grow some fungi to throw some spores in, but they had been either blown away or burned. Gigantomachia began to stand up, only for the floor beneath him to detonate once more, sending him even further down. Momo had placed several explosives underground thanks to Juzo just in case. With the sudden delay, the other heroes caught up and began fighting the League to distract them. Empty Lady had been ready to jump up and grab Gigantomachio's head to pry his jaws open when Melissa suddenly spoke into head earpiece. "Lock down one of his arms," shouted Melissa. Confused but not arguing, Empty Lady put all her weight onto one of Gigantomachio's left arm. Melissa took a deep breath before closing her eyes and crossing her arms, focusing as much as she could. Seconds later, a limb came out from the ground next to Gigantomachio's right arm. Then came another, and even more. The amount of limbs began to grow exponentially, with some limbs growing on top of other limbs. Altogether, they formed two giant arms and hands that immediately pushed down Gigantomachia's left arm. In the fire that was blazing, Mina came rushing out of it, utilizing her newest move, Acid Man, to protect herself from the fire. She generated enough acid to cover her whole body to protect herself from the flames as she ran through it. She dispersed it when she was in the clear. Gigantomachia growled as he tried to close his mouth, only for black strands to suddenly latch onto its upper jaws. "Open up!" shouted Izuku in the air as he pulled, using Black Whip with his left hand to grab Gigantomachia's mouth, and using one for all at 100%, wrenching his mouth open. Gigantomachia began to flail, but Empty Lady and Melissa were able to restrain his arms for a bit. "You gnats are annoying," grunted Gigantomachia as a shield visor began forming on his face. The voice shocked Mina, remembering that time when she had managed to distract a tall man from hurting two of her old classmates. Her mind and body suddenly flashed back to being in middle school. She had bravely interfered, but the aftermath had left her crying in fear. "It's him," thought Mina before realizing what she had done. Her momentary pause caused her to misthrow her flask. She quickly went to catch it, only to see Gigantomachia trying to lunge forward with his chin, as he couldn't move anything else right now. And yet Mina was close enough that if she collided against him, she would suffer broken bones and lacerations considering how rough and jagged his skin was right now. Right before impact though, Aijiro blitzed his way forward, grabbing Mina and tossing her back while tanking the hit himself. Luckily, Aijiro had been in his unbreakable form, and tanked it without much injury. Aijiro managed to put his clawed hands onto Gigantomachia's jaws to prevent him from falling back before tossing his flask into Gigantomachia's open mouth. The flask broke inside Gigantomachia's mouth, making Aijiro grin with success. Two more flew into his mouth, tripling the dosage. "Come on, let's get out of here," shouted Tetsu as he helped Mina up, having thrown his flask in along with Mina's. Gigantomachia roared in anger as his claws burrowed deeply into the ground, giving him leverage to push Melissa's arms off. With his free hand he grabbed Empty Lady and threw her head first into the ground. The impact would have knocked her out and fractured her skull on solid ground, but Tobito managed to rush in and change the ground's property to become elastic, letting her bounce on it instead. The collision still gave her one hell of a concussion though. Gigantomachia shrugged off the heroes trying to capture Dabi and the others, picking them up in his hand while flicking off a few heroes trying to capture them. The original League of Villains had not gotten off easily, though, due to Izuku knocking out a good majority of the PLF members. More heroes attacked them, forcing them to defend then attack. "Now!" shouted Momo. A second later, titanium and magnesium alloy chain was fired at Gigantomachia's body. One part of the chain went under his armpit, while the other went above his shoulders. The remaining lengths of the chain flew past him. "Pull!" roared Majestic as he and the other heroes grabbed on whatever part of the chain they could and pulled. They had been given a quick overview of what the plan was, and with the amount of power Gigantomachia was showcasing, they had no real choice but to follow it. Empty Lady grabbed one of the ends and pulled while Melissa grew giant hands once more to pull the other side. Gigantomachia had been ready to turn around and permanently ensure that the gnats wouldn't resist when he saw something glowing in front of him. Focusing on the glow, he saw a kneeling Momo, who was looking tired and emancipated, standing next to an electromagnetic railgun with Denki holding onto wires connected to it. "This is our last shot," shouted Momo. "Fire!" Denki used his quirk to power the railgun, pouring all the power he had into the wires to supply the necessary energy needed to fire the railgun. The railgun fired right into Gigantomachia's stomach, expending the bullet Momo had created. Even with all his additional quirks that All for One had given him, Gigantomachia couldn't help but roar in pain. The bullet had dug into his hardened muscles, though not completely penetrating through it. It was, however, enough to cause him to bend over in pain. With Gigantomachia keeling over, all the heroes grabbing the chain pulled as hard as they could. This forced Gigantomachia to straighten his spine as well as pull his head to look up. Gigantomachia had been distracted by everybody else that he failed to keep track of Izuku, who had been the one responsible for stopping him in the first place. His eyes widened soon as he saw just Izuku was doing. Floating above him was Izuku, his right arm stretched behind him in the air. However, it was that right limb that caught Gigantomachia's attention. Stretched behind Izuku was a giant fist the size of Gigantomachia's torso. The limb had been twisting round and round, stretching Izuku's rubbery limits to its limit. Not only was the fist large, but it was also infused with one for all at 100%. However, that was not the only quirk Izuku was using. Azndrgn, Black Whip, Armament Hockey, thought Izuku to himself as he activated each one. His fist was infused with the repetitive motions he did earlier, then wrapped around with Black Whip, and finally infused with Armament Hockey, turning the skin on his right limb obsidian black. And finally, Gears Shift, thought Izuku as he put in the final quirk. Realizing the danger, Gigantomachia quickly gave up trying to pull the chain off or kill the other heroes, focusing on Izuku. With a deep breath, Gigantomachia summoned one more quirk that had been hidden within him, delivered by Shigaraki under All for One's orders. With a deep breath, Gigantomachia roared as he fired a concentrated laser beam, not unlike Yuga's own naval beam. The heat that emitted from the beam was unlike Yuga's, as it was burning hot that everyone around the area could feel the heat emanating from the beam, as well as the destructive power behind it. Transmission second, Tennessee Smash. Izuku fired his punch at Gigantomachia, right into the laser. Due to the addition of Gear Shift, the punch flew even faster, whistling through the air. The fist slammed into the laser beam, stalling for a second, before Izuku's punch tore right through the laser beam. Mr. Compress had already quickly turned Dabi and the others into marbles and was contemplating if he could perhaps touch Izuku's fist before it hit Gigantomachia and turn the said limb into a marble, cutting off his limb while protecting Gigantomachia. While it did make him a little uneasy doing so, he was willing as long as it helped them make it to Shigaraki. However, upon seeing Izuku's punch crushing the laser beam, he immediately opted to turn himself into a marble as he jumped off Gigantomachia. He knew it was a fool's errand to even attempt such a thing. "Master!" shouted Gigantomachia, wanting to apologize for his failure, but he didn't get the chance to express it. Izuku's punch slammed into his face, and with his spine forcefully straightened, Gigantomachia took pure damage straight down his body. Despite all his supporting quirk that helped tank all the other attacks, Izuku's punch overwhelmed all of it. A crater formed underneath Gigantomachia's legs as he crumpled to the ground, losing consciousness. Soon, he was unable to stay up before falling face first into the ground. Silence pervaded the area for a second before the heroes began cheering in victory. The conscious PLF members could only stare in shock at their main weapon to break through the hero's collapse onto the floor before reluctantly surrendering. Izuku let go of his form, expelling the air out of his body as he shrank down to his chibi form, though he stayed up in the air. As much as he wanted to land and regroup with his friends and girlfriends that he dearly missed, he needed to head over to Jaka City to help out. It wasn't over until Shigaraki Tamura was arrested. With a wave to the others, Izuku flew towards Jaka City. He was not the only one heading towards that direction. Just as Izuku had punched Gigantomachia, Mr. Compress had turned himself into a marble in the air. The shockwave from the punch had coincidentally sent the marbles flying towards Jaka City. "There's no time to dally," shouted Midnight as she helped Tobito up. "Arrest the villains, move the injured to a secure area. Once we're done with that, we need to head over to Jaka City to help out the others." The heroes nodded as they quickly dispersed around the area. Redestro had been in shock at seeing Gigantomachia being destroyed by that crushing punch that he left himself open for edge shot to finish the fight. As Redestro was falling, he couldn't help but recall the earlier meetings in regard to Izuku Midoriya, how he was deemed a threat to the PLF, with the possibility of becoming a priority target. Destro had been skeptical, as it was just a high school student, but he had to admit the fact the boy could actively resist having his quirk stolen from All For One was somewhat concerning. But before they could implement a plan to assassinate the boy, he had suddenly disappeared from the public view. Skeptic had fruitlessly combed through the media and other sources while Trumpeteer used his connections to find out where Izuku had gone, but all was met with a dead end. Skeptic especially, as some of his attempts in hacking a system ended up with him being counterhacked. In the end, they had given up, especially when one connection pointed towards Niza. They had no desire to draw the attention of that particular chimera while the PLF was still in its early stages. In the end, it's that boy that has caused all of this mess, sighed Destro. Even if we were ambushed, we had a chance to break free and reshape this world to our image. But now there may be a chance that we will fail. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey today. I hope you enjoyed exploring the fascinating what-if scenario of Deku. The possibilities were truly mind-blowing. If you found this video entertaining and thought-provoking, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel. Your support means the world to me and inspires me to bring you more captivating content in the future. Stay tuned for more exciting what-if stories and other amazing videos coming your way. Until next time, take care, stay curious, and keep embracing the power of imagination.